Hi, my name is Rudolph and welcome to my channel Later Life. On this channel I talk about my life as an expat living in Finland. The topic for today's video is things to consider before you decide to move overseas. I'm going to talk in general about three main topics. The first is financial issues to consider, the second is administrative issues, and lastly some social issues. Regarding financial issues, there's 3/4 topics I want to talk about. The first is taxes, the second is private pension and public pension, and finally banking. In terms of taxes, I think before you actually decide to go overseas, or maybe not decide, but before you actually make the move overseas, you need to think about your tax situation. Understand what that move will mean. What does it mean for taxes in your current country, and what does that mean for taxes in your new country? One thing I think is useful would be to find out how will your taxes be treated depending on when you move. There could be a difference in your tax liability whether you move in January or you move in December, and I think that's something important to try and understand before you go so that you don't have any surprises. You may save on taxes if you move at a different time of the year. For private pensions, I'm talking about things like 401ks or IRAs in the US, or ISAs or private pensions in the UK. With these type of accounts, you actually control the money, and I think before you pack up and leave, it's important for you to check with the pension provider and find out what your contributions are, how much you have, what the value of the assets are at the moment, and also things like what the account numbers are, just so that if you need to call them from abroad and ask them about things, that you've got that information right to hand. And I think that will make it a lot easier for you if you need to access information about your pensions. When it comes to state pensions, meaning Social Security in the US or the state pension in UK, the government provides you with information on your contributions and what your anticipated benefits will be once you reach retirement age. I think it's really important to actually get those estimates. First, to check that the contribution amounts are accurate, and then secondly, you have an idea of what money you can expect and when. If you're moving overseas, depending on what your plans are, if you're going permanently, then those funds are pretty much locked, and so the benefits won't be increasing, and you'll have an idea of how much money you've got built up that you can count on when you eventually retire or start drawing down on those funds, or also depending on how much you've moved around, whether or not you have any access to pensions. In the US, I believe you have to work for 10 years in order to access any pension, let's say, Social Security at all. And in the UK, I believe it's also 10 years, where if you've worked, say, 9 years in the UK, then you don't get anything. And that would be good to know before you leave, and not something you assume you're getting a certain amount, and then when you retire you realize you actually don't have the funds coming in that you thought you were going to. And the last topic on the financial side is banking. Have a think about what you're going to do for banking facilities. Are you planning to open an account once you move abroad? Or are you planning to just operate all of your banking via your existing account in your home country? Think about what you're going to do. Whatever you do, I suggest that you also have a backup, and something like using Wise or Revolut are options where they have lots of good currency conversions. So when you're working abroad or traveling overseas, those type of accounts are quite useful. I should also mention that for this video, I'm kind of doing a high-level overview, and I'm going to do some more detailed videos a little bit later where I kind of dive into these topics a bit more. From my own perspective, I've moved countries 5 times, and so there are lots of issues and things that I've come across that I think could be helpful in sharing with you guys. and hopefully this will give you some things to think about as you embark on your journeys. The next topic I want to talk about is just some administrative things that you ought to be considering prior to picking up and moving. First among that is mail. You need a solution for your mail. I use my parents and my mail just gets sent there, but I think a better option is to actually use a mail forwarding service. When I first moved overseas many decades ago, that wasn't such a big thing. Or maybe if it existed, nobody really talked about it. But now with so many digital nomads and people doing RV life, there are certain types of services that cater to people who don't have a regular physical address in their home country. So that's again something I'm going to look at, and I'll probably do a video on that as I do the research to figure out what I'm going to move to. The next thing after you've got your mail sorted out, I think, is to think about your budget. Unless you're being transferred overseas to work for a company where you've been working for a while, I would be very wary about any move overseas. Things are never quite what they seem, and even the best employer may turn out to be not so great, or the job isn't what you thought it was going to be. So I would never suggest you move overseas without a backup plan, without some funds to support you. So I think it's important to do a budget, do your homework, understand what your cost of living is going to be, and be able to have money to fall back on. I think if your plans are that if things don't work out, you're just going to return to your home country, then make sure you've got enough money set aside in an emergency fund to allow you to do that. If your plan is that you're moving overseas and you're either hoping to start up a business or you're going to be working for someone, but if your plan is to stay no matter what in this new country, then I would say you should have a year's worth of living expenses saved up before you go. That may sound drastic, but trust me, when you get there, things are so different, it really takes a while to get yourself established. And I think if you don't have a good safety net, when you get there, you can find yourself in a really difficult situation. And when you move to a new country, you're not going to really know a lot of people, or you don't know who you can trust, and you don't know how things work. So you really don't want to leave yourself exposed like that. Next admin thing you ought to be considering is paperwork. When you go overseas and you need to, say, register, get visas, get work permits, that kind of thing, there's always going to be paperwork required. So make a list of all the things that you need, and not only things like birth certificates, marriage certificates, your degrees. Make a list of those and take them, but also understand in what format they need to be. Sometimes when you go overseas, they won't just take, for example, a marriage certificate. It may need to be notarized. And in some cases, there's a process called an apostille. You may need that. So understand what, other than the actual original document, what needs to be done with that document so that you can use it when you go overseas, and make sure you have all that ready to go. And also, once you have all these documents prepared, also make sure you've got a digital copy. So have a copy that's saved somewhere in the cloud in case something happens and it gets lost. And it probably goes without saying, never check these documents in. Always have them on your person, in your carry-on baggage when you're traveling. Something practical that I like to do when I move to a new country is to sort out my SIM card straight away. I like to get my SIM card in the airport as soon as I land. Yes, it can be done in town, but depending on where you are, you may have difficulty finding a SIM card. But I've never been to an airport these days that does not have a SIM card where you can get a pay-as-you-go type service, and maybe you put $10, $20 on it to just get you going. But I think it's a great idea to have that done and do it while you're still in the airport, because they know you're new and they can help you get it installed in your phone and set up and making sure it's working before you go anywhere. The other thing I like to do while I'm still at the airport is buy an adapter if I think I'm going to need it. Because sometimes when you bring an adapter from your home country or elsewhere, it may not work. So unless you're certain that your adapter works, I always like to get my adapter while I'm still at the airport because you'd be surprised sometimes you end up places and you can spend a lot of time wandering around trying to find an adapter. Speaking of what I like to do at the airport, even before I take off, I like to make sure that I have the local rideshare or taxi app on my phone. You know, when you arrive in a new country and you're at the airport, it can be really overwhelming in arrivals, and you have all these taxi drivers coming at you, trying to get you to take their cab. And, you know, if it's a new country and you don't know how things work, it's very easy to end up in a taxi where, you know, he takes you around the houses and charges you double to or triple what you should actually be paying. So if you've got the app already on your phone, you've done your research up front, then you know that you can order a taxi and you're going to be paying the right price. Some people say there's no such thing as a dumb question, but I disagree. There are dumb questions. And to me, a dumb question is where you ask something without having done any attempt to research and come up with ideas about what the possible solutions can be. And I see a lot of times that foreigners arrive in country and they ask the most basic questions. And it's really annoying when you feel like someone can't be bothered to even do the basic research on their own and they expect someone else to kind of lay out for them and explain to them how everything works. For example, questions like, where's the best place to live? Where's the best place to shop? Where's the best place to eat? How do I get a job? Very big, generic questions which, you know, are very difficult to answer because the best place for someone is, for me, for example, is not necessarily going to be the best place for you. So, you know, you need to ask, I think, more pointed questions. Something like, you know, I'd like to live near the beach. I've heard about this area and that area. You know, what do you think? Or, you know, I like to be in an urban center. I've heard about living in this part of town or that part of town. You know, my interests are such and such. And based on that, what do you think would make a better place to live? It kind of shows that you've done a bit of research and you're not just, you know, some airhead that's just shown up with no thought or plans about what you're going to do. Now, one thing I think that will help you with that is groups, like Facebook groups. I don't know if there are any other types of groups, but that's primarily what I see. So in my case, for example, I'm in 3 Facebook groups. I'm in a Americans in Finland group, a Brits in Finland group, and a expats in Finland group. And I would say you should join this at least 3 months, and I would say 6 months to a year before you go into a new country, because it's full of advice and questions that people have. And by looking at the different questions that people have, it gets you thinking and it helps you understand what issues and problems you're going to face. And it's so much better if you can anticipate these things and resolve any issues before you actually turn up. Similar, like I was talking about before, making sure you have your documentation ready and in the right format. You'll get a lot of advice just by looking and seeing what people who have recently arrived are facing. And that's a great way to do some homework, and it will really benefit you. Lastly, I want to just touch on a few social topics. One thing to note when you move abroad is that it can be really difficult for you because when you go to a new country, you're leaving aside not only the people that you know, but also the customs. Even if you move to an English-speaking country or a country that speaks your same language, the culture will be very different and you'll find it difficult to just adapt and get up to speed with how things are done in the new country. So I think you will find that you're speaking a lot to your friends and family back home, especially when you move, to just kind of commiserate and just explain how you're doing and just to kind of feel a bit of comfort. So I think know that that's going to happen and plan for it. Another thing I think it's important is to try and do like a travel calendar. Depending on where you are, maybe you need to spend a certain number of days in country, or you don't want to spend over a certain number of days in country, which again could be also tied to your tax situation. Or as part of your budgeting, if you think, you know, you want to go back to see a certain person's wedding or certain holidays, that kind of thing. I think it's useful to kind of try to map out your year where you're going to be. If you need to do visa runs, when, how often are you going to do them? Which countries are you going to go to? And try and have all of that planned. And once you kind of have that idea, it's also a good idea to speak to your friends and family and try and encourage them to come and visit you, because then that way that can kind of help break up your time when you're still getting acclimated to the new country. And that's quite a nice way to kind of still maintain your ties. I think one of the things that you will find is that over time, even maybe with your very closest friends, the bonds will stay, but with a lot of people who were pretty good friends when you were living in the same city, maybe someone you played tennis with or met at the gym, that kind of thing. A lot of times those relationships tend to just kind of slowly ebb away over time. And that's something you just need to be aware of and think about, what are you going to do to try and either retain those relationships or make new relationships in the place where you've moved to. I find that usually for the first 2 years when I'm in a new country, people are very interested to come and visit. But over time, especially after 1 or 2 visits, most people do not continue to come back again and again. So you may find yourself feeling like you're the one always having to travel back to, see friends and family. It's just something to be aware of. And if that's something that you want to make sure that you do, then make sure you've put that in your budget so that you have the funds available and you don't feel that you're missing out on something that you really want to accomplish. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks for checking out this video. I'll be making some more video where I'm going to give you a lot more tips and go into a lot more detail on these topics that I've just touched upon this time. Thanks. Bye-bye.